Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Riots erupted across America last night. Protesters took to the streets in a violent reaction to a grand jury decision not to charge the officers in the shooting death of Breonna Taylor.
In Louisville, 2 police officers were shot, and the governor of Kentucky has called on the National Guard for help. Jenna Browder reports.
Protests erupted across the country overnight following the decision in the Breonna Taylor case. And in Louisville, they turned violent.
We have an officer down.
The officers shot investigating reports of gunfire at an intersection where a crowd had gathered.
I am very concerned about the safety of our officers.
It's not clear if the shootings were related to the protests. Still, the governor of Kentucky calling up the National Guard to help.
I understand he's called up the National Guard, which is a good thing. I think it's a very positive thing.
President Trump tweeting he's praying for the officers shot. His 2020 rival Joe Biden also weighing in on Twitter. Even amidst the profound grief and anger today's decision generated, violence is never and can never be the answer. Taylor was killed in her apartment in an exchange of gunfire when officers tried to serve a search warrant. Only one of the 3 officers was charged with crimes, but they're not related to Taylor's death. Former officer Brett Hankinson is charged with endangering neighbors next door by opening fire without a clear aim or shot. The grand jury found the other 2 officers used their weapons justifiably. Detective Miles Cosgrove and Sergeant John Mattingly.
The grand jury agreed that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in the return of deadly fire after having been fired upon by Kenneth Walker.
Walker, Taylor's boyfriend, says he fired a warning shot when he didn't hear police announce themselves. But the Attorney General says a witness told investigators officers did knock and identify themselves.
In other words, the warrant was not served as a no-knock warrant.
The FBI is investigating the case, including the information that led to the search warrant. Taylor's family attorney called the decision offensive. And last week, the city of Louisville settled a lawsuit brought against the 3 officers, agreeing to pay Taylor's mother $12 million and enact police reforms. In Washington, Jenna Browder, CBN News.
Well, there's a lot coming out in this grand jury. You heard some of that testimony, but here's the key. An independent witness, a non-police witness, said there was a clear announcement. It wasn't executed as a no-knock warrant. There was a clear announcement. And then the other testimony that when the battering ram opened the door, the 2 occupants of the apartment were there standing in a hallway, and one of them raised a weapon and fired on the police and hit an officer in the leg. The officers then returned fire. Why does this kind of fact pattern lead to riots in our streets? What is that? And how can you possibly claim that this is some kind of white supremacy or systemic racism when Daniel Cameron is African American and he's the Attorney General supervising this investigation and coming to these conclusions? This doesn't make sense to me. This is not something to riot over. Well, in other news, Israel is tightening up its nationwide lockdown after a 24-hour surge in COVID-19 cases and deaths. John Jessup has more on that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That's right, Gordon. Just 1 week after Israel began a second COVID-19 lockdown, the country's coronavirus task force is taking further action. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has more.
The push for a more rigid lockdown came just after word of nearly 7,000 cases and 32 deaths in a 24-hour period.
The situation is bad. We're seeing a steep rise in morbidity rates.
Following hours of heated debate, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pushed through the measures, despite opposition from the finance ministry and others.
As Prime Minister, I'm obligated to protect your lives, and everyone must understand that this is a life-threatening situation. That's why there's no other choice. We're going to make hard decisions and save lives with your cooperation.
Israel has had more than 206,000 cases since the start of the pandemic, with more than 650 now in serious condition. The increased restrictions would begin Friday and are scheduled to last at least until the end of the holidays, about 2 weeks. For now, the lockdown is expected to include synagogues, except for limited prayers on Yom Kippur, reducing protesters and allowing demonstrations within a kilometer of one's house, closing non-essential businesses, reducing public transport, and allowing citizens to gather with only their nuclear families. The closure will cost an estimated $10 billion if it lasts 3 weeks. Many argue it's unnecessary, but Netanyahu prevailed.
Whoever thinks we can work with the plague exploding and this won't affect the economy is mistaken.
Netanyahu said more important than the closure itself is that Israelis wear masks and don't hold large gatherings. Chris Mitchell, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Chris. Well, back here in Washington, temperatures ran a little high in the Senate Wednesday as Dr. Anthony Fauci sparred with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul asked Dr. Fauci why New York City seems to have conquered the coronavirus.
They are looking at the guidelines that we have put together from the task force of the 4 or 5 things of masks, social distancing, outdoors more than indoors, avoiding crowds, and washing hands.
Or they've developed enough community immunity that they're no longer having the pandemic.
I challenge that, Senator, because I want to, please, sir, I would like to be able to do this because this happens with Senator Rand all the time. You were not listening to what the director of the CDC said, that in New York, it's about 22%. If you believe 22% is herd immunity, I believe you're alone in that.
Now, the head of the FDA also testified to the Senate Health and Education Committee. He said the vaccination process will be guided by science, not politics. Dr. Robert Redfield, the head of the CDC, said it could take until July of next year before a vaccine is distributed to everyone. This news as Johnson & Johnson announced it's beginning final stage testing on a single-dose vaccine. Well, the Trump administration took a major step in protecting life this week, unveiling a new executive order requiring the Secretary of Health and Human Services to protect newborns, including those born extremely premature or with disabilities. President Trump made the announcement at the virtual National Catholic Prayer Breakfast Wednesday.
Today I am announcing that I will be signing the Born Alive executive order to ensure that all precious babies born alive, no matter their circumstances, receive the medical care that they deserve.
And the order states it is U.S. policy to recognize the human dignity and inherent worth of every newborn and infant and ensures each child has the protection of the laws to which every person is due. Well, as the country's political divide grows wider by the day, spiritual leaders in Ohio believe prayer can turn the tide. Prayer leaders will meet tomorrow for 1 hour at the State House in Columbus, with churches across Ohio to seek forgiveness, mercy, and favor upon America and our political leaders. Brian Hansen of Capital Ministries says turning to God is the only answer for what's ailing a divided America.
We're looking to our politicians, our political leaders, for all the answers to what's going on. This policy or that policy, or we've done this right, or we've done that. You know what? The fact of the matter is this: we don't have a policy problem. We have a soul problem.
And speaking of prayer, people from across the country will be gathering here in Washington, D.C. this weekend to pray for America. The event is called The Return, and you can watch it live on CBN News. Tune in Friday evening from 6 to 9 and Saturday morning from 8 to 9 o'clock at night on the CBN News Channel, cbnnews.com, and all of our digital platforms. Gordon, if ever there was a time we needed prayer, it's now. And I understand that you and Pat will be participating.
Yes, we're both part of the return, and we encourage people this weekend to pray. Please pray for our country. We're at such a crossroads. We are so divided. It seems like we can't even listen to each other or even listen to the facts of the case, let alone have a reasonable discussion of the issues and decide together on a path forward for our country. Everything seems to be so polarized, and particularly polarized over a particular election. Maybe I'm showing my age, but I've seen lots of elections, and I have to testify, it really doesn't make that much difference. I mean, some laws and decisions have, but in terms of the overall culture, what's going to make a difference? Well, I know one thing that makes a difference. When you pray together, it's very difficult after that to come into argument. It is an absolute solution to bring brotherhood, to bring a more cohesive society. When we stop everything and we say, God, we can't do this, but you can. And can you come and be in our midst and make us one again, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all? Let me underline that. It's very hard to have any kind of brotherhood when there's no liberty and there's no justice. So let us strive for that and not have these words be aspirational, but let's have them be real. And with God's help, we can do that. We can build a better culture. We can build a better society. I, for one, want to leave that to my children and to my grandchildren. And can we come together and say, well, what's the best way to do that? That would be a wonderful thing.
Yes, it would. I think Justice Scalia and Justice Ginsburg proved that with their friendship.
Yes, they did.
Though very different in their positions on things.
And very different from an overall view of the Constitution, but they were still able to come together and say, all right.
Genuine friendship, yes. Let's pray for that.